Hello guys, and welcome to the first developer bootcamp or webinar for the year 2021. And I'm Ashutosh. I'll be your host today, and I am joined by Arena. She'll be helping us with all the questions that you guys might have while I cover all the different aspects of the session today. So feel free to put your questions on the Q&A section, and then Arina will take them over, or perhaps you and I'll also have a look at them from time to time, and I'll try to answer them as well. So yeah, without further delay, let's just dive in. So as the session topic says, this is basically not a regular kind of a bootcamp which we generally do. It is sort of flavored in capital markets domain, since we are focusing on different domains starting this year. So this one is focused on capital markets. So we'll let you know what we are doing on capital markets, and perhaps how you could build a simple application which caters to one of the use case in capital markets. All right, so before we just start, before we go ahead, here are a few of the references, which is basically useful for people who have joined in for the very first time. And if you're new to Corda, here are different references which will be helpful for you going forward. So we have a YouTube channel where we post most of our videos, so which is available at youtube.com/Corda blockchain. There's also a free training available for people who are interested in training. It's at training.corda.net. It's free and you can use it at your own will. And then we have a public Slack, which is a community of over 9,000 developers now, CorDapp developers. So feel free to join in if you're not already part of it. The official documentation is available at docs.corda.net. We have a GitHub repository at github.com/Corda. So all the code that you will find which relates to Corda is available over there. Corda is open source. And then if you want to email us, which is the developer relations team, you can write to us at r3devrelations@r3.com. And finally, last but not the least, if you like to tweet, then do use our Twitter handles @Corda blockchain and @inside R3 for R3. And do not forget to use the hashtags #Corda and #R3. All right, so with that done, let's just dive in and start with the session today. So, so generally, if you talk about capital markets, right, it's a very huge field, and there are a lot of use cases, if not thousands, then hundreds of them. So we cannot just focus on the entire domain right on the go. So we are just focusing on few of the use cases which are important, and currently will as we dig deeper into capital markets, we'll be looking at more use cases, and we'll be expanding our horizon from there. But then the primary thing that we want to do is to do a primary issuance, which is basically issuing asset on ledger. So that's the first step towards any towards any use case, I guess. First of all, you have to have an asset on your blockchain to be able to do anything with it. So our first goal should be to onboard these assets, or issue these assets onto the ledger, which is basically primary issuance. And then other area where we're looking at is the transfer of these assets for faster clearing. So we have companies or our partners who are building CorDapps around this, which will allow you to do trade of directly between assets within a blockchain platform, basically, which will be powered by Corda. Then obviously payments and settlement. It's a broad field which like covers a lot of different use cases, not just capital markets, but then it's it has its own issues around reconciliation and all these kind of things, which blockchain could be a great fit. So we are already into payments and settlement. So we have the token SDK, and then we're building on top of it, we're building the payments SDK, which will also make things easier going forward, even for developers to integrate with existing payment rails and stuff. So watch out for that. Few examples which are worth mentioning in the capital markets domain are the Spanta blockchain. I don't know if you've heard about that, but this is a platform which is built and it's already live. We have around 100 Italian banks who are transacting on them, and we already have more than 200 million transactions done on this particular platform. So that's a big thing to happen. And then obviously one of the other big names which we're proud of taking is Nasdaq, and they are building their next gen platform on Corda blockchain. You can also find some news releases around that if you if you do a Google search with Nasdaq and R3, and you can read more about that. And yeah, there are a lot more, but then I've just mentioned few of the important ones which will make sense to you guys. We also have Contour, which are one of our partners, and they're a company who have a trade finance network, and they are already live. And some of the big names that are part of the network are like HSBC, and we have Standard Chartered, we have BNP Paribas. And so if you look at all these examples and what we are doing in capital markets, we are quite deep into it. And then obviously we will be looking to broaden our use cases and go more deeper in the years to come. All right, so that's what we are doing and what our partners and clients are doing. With that, let's just look at what we will be doing today, and what are the different things that we'll be covering as part of the session today. Capital markets, if you think of, is sort of a complex field, right? If you're new to capital markets and you do not understand much of the stuff that's happening around here, a lot of terms that will come in the way that you'll not really understand. So don't worry if you're not from a capital markets domain, and because we're going to take care of a very simple use case which will be easier to understand, and that thing is due diligence and information sharing. Don't be worried about the name. Probably due diligence might seem to be a very complex topic, but it really isn't. So basically, what we are talking about is we're just making sure that due diligence is the process of making sure that what someone pretends to be is exactly the same. So basically, if I say that I am a company who is going to go for an IPO, and I so that this is the amount of transactions that I do, and I give a valuation for my company. So due diligence is that process where you just there are different entities who will do an audit of your organization, and finally will provide all the details regarding whatever information that you're providing is actually true or not. So that's the process of due diligence. Right. So this is also important in different aspects, where perhaps if you're going for a syndicated loan from multiple different banks, let's say, then the considering the amount of syndicated loans are basically higher. So the regulators generally want you to do a process of due diligence. The banks need to do a process of due diligence before they actually even lend out those high sum loans to these different companies, right? So that's where due diligence is. So it's more about taking care of the different scenarios of whether a company is or the data that a company is providing is true or not. So you could have a company which is or multiple companies who are basically wanting to invest on a particular startup, say. And then you could have an auditor who is basically responsible for auditing all the details of the company and providing all the information. And then the regulator who would be who would finally be given the due diligence checklist, so that they know that everything has been done in a proper manner. So that's what due diligence is. But the problem here is you don't really trust anyone, right? You don't really even trust the auditors. Probably there might be a scenario where one of the regulator might have sued a particular auditor because he would have done something wrong in the past. So you need to have a list of trustworthy auditors, which will be given by the regulator and stuff. And then we look at scenarios how different organizations who want to involve in this particular process are able to do all these due diligence process, even they don't trust each other, and still they're able to trust the information, kind of stuff, right? So that's what we are going to do. Well, so this is what our entire use case would look like. We'll look at this in more details as we go forward. But generally, let's say we have a company A, and then this company is required to do a due diligence on different areas like financial document due diligence, or corporate record due diligence, or tax documents due diligence. And then these different banks who are probably requiring to give the loan out to this company are required to do this due diligence, and then provide all these information to the regulator using the due diligence checklist. and the regulator will be publishing a list of qualified auditors. So one thing that could really happen here is if you're not working on a distributed environment, say all these bank A, B, and C will have to do their own due diligence on all these things. Like bank A will have to do the financial documents, the corporate records, as well as the tax documents, and then provide the due diligence checklist to the regulator so that he's okay with lending out the loan. Similar process has to be followed by bank B and bank C. But then if you're on a distributed network like a Corda network, then what you could do is if bank A is doing a financial document due diligence, he can probably give that audit report back to bank B, and then that could be shared, that information could be shared with bank B so that he doesn't have to do the same work all over again. And that will obviously reduce the cost of this entire process and also make it more seamless, reduce the time required to do this entire process as well. So two different benefits that could come out of it, and Corda could be really, really helpful in this case, where you have this kind of a use case, and then different entities are working together to do this entire due diligence process, where they don't have to repeat the entire process and take the overall cost of doing the same repeated or the redundant task over and over again, but they can share what they have already done with the others, and they can benefit from this distributed network scenario, right? So that's the entire use case. But if you look at this entire thing, it's pretty wide, and we cannot really implement a use case while on this particular session. So we already have a CorDapp which is pre-implemented, and we have covered one of the scenario in that particular CorDapp, which will be showing you. And I'll also run through the code while we do this. And what we have done is we have left we have done one of the workflow where you could basically so basically your regulator would have shared the list of qualified auditors, and then one of the bank, say bank A, would do one of the due diligence and share that record with another bank. And then finally they can send this checklist to the regulator. But what we have left out is to complete the process, you have to do the other two due diligence process, which is the corporate records and the tax documents. And then once all these entire thing is done and sent back to the auditors, the due diligence process can be considered to be complete. So that other part, the second part, is left for you guys to implement, but you can try it on your own time. I'll show you the code for what for the first part of it, which is already done. And then you can give it a try, and then if and then perhaps sometime we'll post the solution as well onto the GitHub repo. In the samples section, you can have a look at the samples if you're not able to complete this on your own. But do give it a try after this particular webinar. All right. For people who have joined in and do not know what exactly a CorDapp is, this will serve as a basic introduction to you. So I'll just go through some of the stuff which will help you understand the code, which I'll be showing later on. So CorDapps generally have three different components. We have states, we have contracts, and we have flows. So what exactly are states? Well, states are the objects that you record onto the ledger. So this is where you have all your facts recorded. So if, for example, I say I want to record a vehicle onto a Corda ledger, let's say, and what you have is your vehicle would have different properties, like perhaps say the model number, or the company, which you or the make, the model, and then you might have the engine number and all these different kind of things, right? Whether it's a petrol vehicle or whether it's a diesel vehicle, and all these kind of things. So all these different facts are combined together into a single object, which represents the state, and that state is stored onto the ledger, or the Corda ledger. And these states, for that matter, are immutable. So once you have recorded all these facts into a state and put that onto the ledger, you cannot really change that facts on the state anymore. So but when you do a transaction, it requires you to change states, right? You're required to change certain properties of that state. So how do you do that? Well, states itself are immutable, but you can change them by means of transactions. By change, what I mean is you can what you basically do is you don't really change what is already on the ledger, but then you create a new state with the updated facts and then put it on the ledger, while you mark the previous one, which was created earlier, as used or invalid, and then that will not be used anymore in further transactions. So now these kind of transactions, which I said, they need certain rules. You cannot just change stuff on your own with whatever will you want to do. So you have to be certain that there are few business rules, few business validations that are required to be done while such kind of actions are taken. So that's where we have contracts. So contracts are all these business rules that you write onto a particular Java file, and that particular file is run while you do each of these transactions. So whenever there is a change of state from one state to another, from one particular snapshot of that state to a new snapshot, then whatever action you're performing, so that action has to be validated using the rules that are written onto the contract. So that's contract for you. And then finally, we have the flows. Now, flows is a particular powerful feature in Corda, which allows you to model workflows. So when I say there are these transactions, right? So you have transactions, but when I talk about a transaction, there is always a particular workflow which is required, right? So by workflow, I mean different steps that have to be performed in a particular manner, right? So you have to send this data from one point to other, and then that from that point it has to go to someone else, probably maybe a workflow which requires approvals and kind of stuff, right? So all these different workflows could be modeled using the flow framework of Corda, and that's what you do. So whenever you basically want to update a state, you write a workflow which will generally take care of all the business workflow or business flows that has to be taken care during that transaction. Right. Again, just digging a little deep into what states are. Well, just like I said, states represent facts and they are stored onto the Corda ledger. But states are not available to everyone. So if you know, Corda has this peculiar thing on privacy, right? So we give a lot of importance to privacy. We don't want each and every individual in the or each and every party in the network to be able to see whatever is being stored onto a ledger of one participant. So there is this privacy thing which is there. So which means if you have a particular asset, it will be only visible to others if you want them to know about it. So it's the data is distributed on a need to know basis. So how does that happen? So the entire thing lies on the fact that states are distributed on a need to know basis. So if you look at this simple diagram here, which says Bob, Alice, Carl, and Demi. So these bigger circles here would represent different identities on Corda, different parties on Corda, and the smaller circles would represent a particular state. So if you say state one is, for example, only available to Bob and Alice while others don't know about it, though they're still on the network. So that solves a lot of privacy issues which we have with different other blockchains. So again, coming back to ledger updates, just like I said, you have transactions which will basically take input and will produce output. So each of these transactions, the input is a snapshot of a state which was already existing on the ledger, and then output will be a new snapshot which will be producing and then inserting it onto the ledger after this transaction is successfully completed, right? So each of these transformation requires you to run through certain rules, which are called contracts. And once all these rules, if there are multiple rules in your contract, the transaction is only successful or the update is only recorded onto the ledger when each and every rule is passed. And even if there is a case where you have at least one of the rules even fail, then your entire transaction is said to be invalid. And this update will not really be recorded onto the ledger if your contract validation rule fails. So that's contracts. So one more thing that you have is commands, right? So if you look at this particular transaction, this diagram represents the transactions, basically an issuance transaction. So what we are really doing is we're issuing a particular token, let's say, which has an issuer, an owner, and a particular amount. Now you see this red arrow here which say issue, that's actually is a command. Now if I say I'm doing something with a token, how do you know what exactly I'm doing, and how do you know what are the different rules that I need to validate on? I could be issuing a token, I could be transferring a token, I could be burning a token, right? So there are a lot of different things, there are a lot of different kind of actions that I could take on these things, right? So these commands are the things which tells us what exactly you're doing with a particular asset. And using these commands, you could then choose which particular rules you want to validate upon when the transaction is being done right? So that's commands. So finally, just looking at the flows a little bit. Just like we said, flows are they execute your business logic. They take care of your business workflows. So when you look at this particular flow, it's a pretty simple two-party trade where you're just trading a particular asset with another party. um, so you could say we have two party, node A and node B, and there is this notary pool which is taking care of your double spending thing. So what we generally have is these different steps that are performed. You could see this red boxes are different steps that we do. So it could sound a little overwhelming by looking at this, but it isn't as much because all of these steps are taken care by the Corda APIs. You don't have to do a lot of stuff in here other than calling a certain API. So what are the different steps that we do is we initially what we have to do is we have to propose an update. By propose an update, what I mean is you want to say that I have this particular state on my ledger. I want to update this to a different portable to a different possible snapshot, which has different values on it. So when you propose an update, you have to run the update against your contract, which is where we say check update, and then you have to sign the update. So once your contract has validated successfully, you have to sign it saying that the transaction is this transaction is valid as per me. And then you send it to party B, where they will run the entire process again. By entire process, I mean checking whether this update is valid or not as per the contract, and then providing the signature if it's valid. And once that's done, it will go to the notary, where the notary will check for double spend, and then they will provide their own signature, provided it's not a case of double spend. And once that is done, your records could be updated onto the ledger of each and every participant who are involved in the transaction. Now, this is a case of a very, very simple two-party trade. Things could get really complicated depending on how complex a business workflow is. But just for the purpose of understanding what a workflow is or what a flow is, this will probably make sense to you guys. All right, so let's come back to our scenario. So this is a compressed version. Like I said, we have not implemented the entire thing, but what we are really doing is our case has two banks, two investment firms will be who wants to invest on a particular company. And basically what they have is bank A and bank B. Well, before we proceed, do we have any questions on the CorDapp section? So that because going forward we'll be showing you the code, and if you have any questions over there on the CorDapp section, you can just post it on the Q&A section, and I guess Arena will take care of them. Or perhaps if I see them while I do this, I'll be able to answer them as well. So feel free to put your questions on the Q&A section if you have any. All right, so moving on. So this particular due diligence scenario, which we'll be covering now, it's like a compressed one. Like I said, it doesn't basically cover the entire scenario because that would take a lot of time to showcase. So we have just done a part of it. So what it has is two investment firms. Basically, we say them as Bank A and Bank B, and these two firms are interested in investing in a particular company, or probably providing some loan to a company, and for some reason they have to go through a due diligence process. So we have one auditor which is trustworthy and is provided by the regulator. So the way we have done is we will be uploading this trustworthy auditor onto each and every bank's um, onto each and every bank, and then they can then validate whether a particular auditor is trustworthy or not. And obviously an example regulator, which you can see on the figure as well. Right. So the steps are as such. So you have a regulator who is pre-approved an auditor, and then your bank will ask for an audit report on this particular entity which they want due diligence on, and the audit report will be shared back from the auditor. And then bank A, once they have this particular audit report, can share this audit report with bank B, so they don't have to do this entire process again, and they can save on time and cost. And once they have this particular audit report, they can actually submit the due diligence checklist to the regulator. This is the part which is done. And then there are other so if there are if the due diligence requires you to have three different audit reports, then and you have different auditors to do this audit report. So um, as our example said, we have three different auditors and three different audit report. This is just taking care of one scenario. So you have to, so that this entire app is complete, you have to do the other three audit reports, and then once all these due diligence checklists are signed off and provided to the regulator, this particular due diligence process will be marked as complete. But like I said, we're not really completing the entire process. We're doing the initial part and leaving it to you to complete the entire process. But then, yeah, we'll also provide you with the solution in the coming few days once you give it a try. Right. So this is the entire process which I was talking about. So like I said, it has three banks and three different basically audit reports required. We're just doing the corporate records for now. And you could also go and do the financial documents and tax document, which will be pretty much similar to how you do the corporate records. All right, so let's look at the code and do some demo. Right. Let me open up Idea and share my screen then. Okay, here we go. All right, so here's our CorDapp. So first thing that we have to do is deploy our nodes. I think I've already done that for you guys so that we save on the time. And if I go on to the build.gradle, this is where I find my deploy nodes task, where you would find the nodes. So we have a notary, we have bank A, we have bank B, we have trusted auditors, and we have a regulator, right? So that's what you could find over here. So let me just go ahead and run these nodes. Right. Okay, I guess I'll have to share my terminal. Just give me a second. All right, so yeah, my nodes, they are running. And let me just check if I have all my nodes ready. I have the notary. All right, so I don't have the auditor running properly. Okay, so I have bank A, I have bank B, I have the regulator, I have the auditor, and I have the notary. So yeah, that's all the nodes that I would need. So so first thing that I'll need to do is upload the checklist, which is just a simple Gradle command, which is upload checklist. Okay, hold on. All right. So if you look at the CorDapp, we have a client which is responsible for uploading the checklist. And what we are doing is we have a text file which says who are the, in the contracts, if you look at the resources, we actually have a text file which says who are the trusted auditors. And we have packaged them into a jar since this will be uploaded as an attachment. And then we could actually check against whether it's a trusted auditor or not, whoever is auditing these documents. So I'll just, we have a client to do this stuff for us. So I'll just run the command from IDEA. and that will basically upload the um, the attachment, and we'll have our auditors or our trusted auditors checklist, trusted auditors uploaded onto each and every note. That's what you could basically see on the terminal as well. So we have um, all the attachments uploaded. So once that is done, what we could do is we could start with the demo. Okay. Yeah, so I'll have to go to bank A. So for the first thing that I have to do is basically I have to request the auditor for uh, for the audit of the corporate records, right? So what I have to do, so I'll show you the code for each one of this, but first of all, let's just go ahead and look at the demo. So I go to bank A, and then I can run a flow which says request to validate corporate records. And who is the validator? The validator is the trusted auditor. And then I'm just putting a random number of files, 10. You could basically even pass the real files if you want to, but just to make things simpler, we have just added this as a number. So once you run this particular flow, what you could see is flow has completed, and the request has been sent to trusted auditor. And you get a case ID, which is basically an ID for you, which you will be using later on. So I'll just copy this ID, right? So the next step is to validate these records, right? So once you have done the, once you have sent these information to the auditor, it's the auditor's job now to validate them. So before that, let me show you this request, how that look like on the Corda ledger. Right, so for that I can use a vault query. So there you go. If you look at this, what you see here, let me just try and explain. Yeah, so this should be good. So what we have here is, this is the information that we have sent for auditing. Now you don't see real documents here, which you could do if you, once you implement a real working real world production app, but this will work for us. We just want to show you the process. Right, so we have a particular field here which says qualification, so whether this is qualified or not. So currently it's false. Once we have the auditor done all his audit successfully, we'll run a flow which will basically say that the qualification is true. Now this information should also be available with the auditor. Okay, hold on. All right, so I'm now at the auditor's node, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the same vault query command, and you could see the similar information. That's what we call as the distributed ledger, right? So you could see the similar information on the auditor's node as well, but the others should not be able to see this, since the privacy model of Corda does not allow other nodes to view information that they're not part of. So this information is only available with the auditor and bank A currently, right? So let's just go ahead and do our next step, which is to validate the records. So the auditor needs to run this flow. What that will do is basically it will validate your information. For that, I'll need this case ID. Yeah, I already copied that. And I'll run a flow called validate corporate records, and then this should validate all these records. And once this is validated, if I run the vault query again, what I see is this qualification is true, which means your validation has been done successfully, and bank A should have also received similar information. Right, so yeah, the qualification is done now. So we now have the report done, and the report is sent back to our bank A. So what bank A could do now is he could actually share this information with bank B. So this is the flow which will do that. All right. So I go to bank A and then I can run this particular flow. So what it's doing is I'm again giving it the case ID, which is the auditing result ID. And then whom do I want to send it to? Bank B. And then I want to send the trusted attachment, who the auditor was, so that they can also validate it at their end, since this attachment has been uploaded to each and every node. So that's actually the hash of the attachment which is being passed. So we calculated the hash pre-hand and we are just adding it up here. Right, so the copy has been sent to bank B, and we have a new ID generated for the copy, which bank B can use while they send their due diligence to party B, or to the regulator basically. So I'll just copy and paste it here, while my initial case ID remains this. All right. So to view if party B has, or bank B has actually received this information, I can run this vault query command, and you can see that the same information is copied to a different record and it has been sent to the bank B as well. Right. So what we next need to do is send this to due diligence checklist, send this as a, add this to the checklist and send this information to the regulator, right? So we'll start with bank A, and then we can run this flow, which will basically send this information to the regulator, and we can validate that this has been sent to the regulator using a particular query command. So this is added as due diligence checklist in the regulator node. And what you can see is this is a checklist which has been provided by bank A. And similarly, once we run this from bank B node, you can see the similar information from bank B as well with the regulator. All right, so earlier we had one record, and now if we run the same thing again, we'll have two different records. Now again, you see that the status is incomplete because, as I said, you have to implement the other parts where once you receive all the three required approvals, only then this entire process can be marked as complete, right? So that's the part one of this particular CorDapp. So I'll just move on to the code and try and explain what's going on here and how this app has been implemented. Right, not that difficult as it seems. So we have three parts, like we said. We have the state, contract, and flows. So let's start with the states. If we go down here to states, what we have is the corporate records audit request, right? Pretty simple. This is the state, so this means it will have all the properties that we want. So what are the properties that we see here? If we go here, so properties that we have added are the qualification, the applicant, validator, and number of files, right? So we have the qualification, which basically represents whether your audit report is audited and is qualified or not. And then we have an applicant, which is generally the party applying for the audit report, and then the validator, which is the validator, which is our auditor basically. Number of files, this could generally be even hashes of real documents, which will be stored at some location. And then an ID, which will just to keep track of this uniqueness of this particular request, right? So similarly, going forward, we have certain constructors for this, and then all we have are the getters. That's pretty much it. Similarly, there's just a copy of the same thing, which will be sent as which will be shared with our other banks once you have a due diligence done. Once you have a audit done from the auditor. And then we have the due diligence checklist, which is basically the thing which is stored at the regulator's end. And what we have here are the number of approvals, the status, and the node which is basically sending this checklist. And reported to is basically whom it is reported to, which you can also see on in here, right? and attach approvals. Whoever have attached, whoever have sent these approvals, the IDs of the approval IDs, which we are basically sending to the regulator, right? And then a unique ID, which will uniquely identify this particular checklist. Similarly, going ahead, what we have are nothing but the constructors and few getters and setters. All right, pretty simple. Contract would be pretty simple as well. It's not that you have to write very complex rules, but you can do as per your own business requirements. But for this one, we have kept it pretty simple, where we have just checked for basic things, like if it's an issuance, we're just checking whether if there are no inputs, and the type of output and stuff. Pretty simple and basic stuff, which are done as part of the contract validation. But depending on your business use case and your business rules that you want to implement on this process, you can write your own different validations that you really want to. Right. So without spending much time on the contract, let's move on to the more important part, which is basically our workflows. The first thing that we did was we requested a, a validate, or we requested the auditor to do an audit. So this is the workflow which did that particular thing. So what we need in a flow is basically the first thing that we need is we need to create an output, right, which will be recorded onto the ledger, which is exactly this particular thing, right? The If I go to bank A, this is exactly the thing which we saw after we ran this flow, right? So this is what we recorded onto the ledger, the the request object. So that we need to create this request object and as an output from this flow. So how do we do that? The first thing we need to do is we just create an object of it. And then there is an object called transaction builder, which will basically help you build a transaction. And once you have the transaction builder, you can add output states to it, which is exactly what we've created here. And then we can add commands. Like I said, what commands are, they represent the intent. And then the commands will also accompany who the required signers are, or who should sign on this transaction for it to be successful, right? Once you've done that, you need to verify. This is the step where we talked about verifying this transaction against your contract. So this will do that for you. And then you can sign this transaction using this particular API method called sign initial transaction. And finally, you can collect signatures, or you can ask others to sign on it using this collect signatures flow. And finally, once you're done with that, you can just call the finality flow, which will take care of other steps like getting it notarized and recording onto the ledger, right? That's what it is. So initially, if you look at this, we have the notary, which we can actually grab from the network map, which is available using the service hub. The service hub is an object which is available within the flows, which gives you access to different services of the node. And one of them is a network map cache, from which you can get different identities. So for us, the interested identities we are in is the notary. So we get the notary identities and we pick out the first notary available, because that's the one which will be needed for notarization of this transaction, right? So the responder is pretty simple. Well, if you're new and you do not understand what a responder is, so basically the responder is that part of the flow which will be run by the other party or your counterparty, right? So your initiator is the one who is doing the initial step of initiating the flow, but you also need to get some response from the other parties, right? So the other parties will be running the responder flow, which is this particular class. And what they will be doing is, one is we're asking for collecting signatures, right? So what your responder one will do is basically they'll sign on this transaction once they receive this transaction. And that happens in this part where we have a signed transaction flow. And once we call this collect signature flow, the control comes down here to sign transaction flow, and then they can just sign their transaction and return back the signed transaction, which can be captured over here, right? So similarly, we have the complementary flow for finality flow. This will take care of notarizing the transaction and recording it onto the initiator side. But to record it onto the responder side, we need the receive finality flow, which will take care of the part where you need to record the transaction at the other parties who apart from the initiator. That's pretty much it. That's the flow. It's pretty simple. All we have done is basically created an output state and build our transaction using the transaction builder. And these are pretty much template code, which you'll find in almost all the flows, which will basically do any transactions. So similar stuff, if you look at validate corporate records, that's doing the same thing. One extra thing that it's doing is basically it's doing a vault query. The request validate corporate record did not had a vault query because it was creating a state for the very first time. But here, what we are doing is we are picking up something which is already on the ledger. So we need to query the ledger. So that's done using the vault query API. And once we have this particular, um, just give me a second. All right, yeah. Sorry about that. So yeah, so once we have our so we have the vault query API which you could use. So we are using a linear query criteria which is used to get linear state now. And once you have, what we need is we are again putting some more criteria onto the query which says we want this particular UUID, we want the state to be unconsumed, and we want relevant states. Right. So once we call this query, we will be returned with our with the state that we are interested in. And once we have this state, we can use this as an input on our transaction. Like I said, transactions have inputs and outputs, and if you want to change a state which is already there in the ledger, you have to use it as an input and produce a new state which will be converted as an output. So we again create a new output with all our updates, and then we do the similar stuff that we did earlier. Right, we have a transaction builder, we have the verifier, we have the signature, and then collect signature and finality flow. Pretty much simple, pretty much what we did in the last one. Only thing that we updated, or only change that we have here, is this particular thing where we did a query onto the vault. Right. So similar stuff you'll find in the others as well, where we have the share one. Share is it's just that it will use a different state, but then the other steps will be pretty much similar. So you have a vault query to fetch the state out of the ledger, and then you create an output, which is this is the input which you got, and then you create the output, which is here, and basically the transaction builder, the verify, the signature, and then the collect signature, and finally the finality flow. That's it. And finally, adding it to the checklist, which is also not that different from what we already saw in the last two flows. Only thing that will change here is perhaps the parties that are involved, which is again used, which is again passed as part of the parameters. Right. So a vault query, and then you do certain check flow, certain other checks like so this is where it gets a little complicated, because we are trying to check whether what kind of records it is, and depending on that whom to send that finality flow response to. So if it's a corporate record audit, we are sending it to bank A, and if it's a different one, like the copy of the corporate record audit, which is what we have sent as a copy to the bank B, then we are using this finality flow where we pass the a different participant basically. So that's not what we have did with the others ones, but the only difference here is we're just utilizing the correct party in the finality flow, so that the data is actually synced properly with the other parties here. All right, so that's pretty much it about this particular use case and this particular demo. So basically, I hope it makes sense to you guys. Few of this code might seem a little complicated to people who have joined in for the very first time with us. But then if you are here for the first time, I would highly recommend you to go through some of our previous webinars where we have done a pretty simple use case, which is a token, and then you can come back to this one, which will make more sense to you guys. All right, so let's just jump back. Okay, just a second. All right, so that's our demo, I guess. This is all from my end. Any other questions? I guess I'll just look at the Q&A section a little bit to see if we have any more questions. All right, so I guess that's it. There are no more questions here. So if you have any questions, please post it here, or you can also ask us questions later on public Slack. If you're not there, please join public Slack, and you can just directly ping us as well. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I hope you had you had some good information on capital markets and what we have been doing on it. Again, if you find this a little complicated, the particular use case which we explained, I would highly recommend just go and look out on our YouTube channel, where you will find different other videos, which will be mostly the bootcamp video, where we cover a very simple use case. But if you're not new, I guess you would have made sense to you, and because this is a very basic use case which doesn't have as much of complexities as it could be. And I would highly want you guys to basically just try and complete this at your own time, obviously. But then yeah, we'll also complete this and put this entire CorDapp on the samples repository, so feel free to check it out there. All right, thank you everyone for joining, and that's it from my side. And we'll see you in the next webinar. Bye-bye.